Okay, welcome everyone to Senate Education Committee. It's Friday, yay, for those who care about Fridays, and I do. Even though I'm retired, Friday still seems like a day that we should celebrate. So anyway, we're excited to have you all here. We're going to try and get through 4 bills today if we can. It may work out, it may not, but anyway, let's go ahead and take roll, Ashley.
Madam Chairman, January 31st, 2025, Senate Education, Senator Brennan,
Here.
Senator Olson,
Here.
Senator Rothfuss,
Caught myself.
Senator Scott, Chairwoman Schuler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Today, we're going to start out with Senate File 137, School Finance Cash Reserves. And the good Senator Dockstader is here today to present this bill, so welcome and tell us what you want us to know about this bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Bring you Senate File 137, School Finance Cash Reserves. Committee, I brought this last year, but pulled back because I was concerned about what we're doing with some amendments in my small schools. So went back home, got regrouped and bring it back, and all is well with the school districts as I checked with them. So I'll do an overall explanation, Madam Chair and members of the committee. In 2022, the legislature increased the operating balances and cash reserves that a school district may carry over from year to year, from 15% to 30%. That provision sunsets on June 30th, 2026, under current law. Senate File 137 extends that sunset date from June 30th, 2026 to June 30th, 2028, allowing the district to continue to carry 30% of their cash reserves and operating balances from 1 year until the next, as authorized by current law. As noted, I wanted to double check with my small districts as well, and the increase in the operating balance and cash reserves may particularly benefit the smaller districts, giving them the ability to cash flow their budgets more effectively. With that, Madam Chair, I'll highlight the bill. Page 1, we've got the extended sunset date. We note that the funds from the foundation account are taken care of by January 31st. Page 2, the Education Department tracks the balance in the reserves, takes care of the accounting. Page 3, the rules and the reporting, and an explanation of what the balance and the cash reserves are doing, and then the extended date as well, June 30th, 2028. And then the note on the final part is that definition of capital construction does not include major building and facility repair. Effective date, July 1st, 2025. So I'm back once again to ask for your support of Senate File 137. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions for the good senator? Thank you, Senator Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Dockstader, this is new, this is all new to me, so I'm just trying to make sure I understand it. So out of the money that is appropriated from the foundation to a district can only carry over a certain percentage every year, and then if it carries over more than that, it reverts back to the foundation?
Madam Chair.
Senator Dockstader?
Madam Chair, Senator, it's correct, and it was set up to sunset on June 30th, 2026. And the districts are asking for an extension of that sunset, simply asking that they can manage their funds.
So follow.
Yes, go ahead, follow up.
So then why, Madam Chairman, Senator Dockstader, why is there a sunset? Why is this, what's the purpose of not just having a?
Madam Chair,
Senator?
if I had my way, we would have no sunset and we just
Okay.
allow them to have access over these funds. But we're trying to find a balance here.
I see.
Okay, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
So a little context for that, the 15% was in statute for a long time as the reserve that they can carry over. Legislature changed it to 30% due to COVID, anticipating a lot of additional funding and need to carry over through federal funds and through other funds. So we upped the window of carryover. And the reason it was limited previously to 15% was the idea that this year's school foundation program is supposed to be used for this year's students. It's not supposed to be a situation where a school district builds up a large cash reservoir, because that's actually unconstitutional. You can't not spend the funds on the students that year and be compliant. So the idea was, well, we want to discourage a district from building up a large cash trove, because that means that they have to be shorting some students in some years to achieve that. But I think what we see now is that due to COVID, many school districts ended up increasing it, so they're within that 15 to 30% window, and maybe we can get some data on that. I do still have that same reservation where if we increase it too much, we don't want school districts to feel like they're obligated to save money from year to year, because we have, in theory, right-sized, although we know that we're insufficient in some areas, the school foundation program, so that what we have each district spend is the right amount of spending for that particular school year. So that's kind of the background and where we're at. And I don't know where school districts are at between 15 and 30. We monitored where they were at with their reserves many times over the years and got printouts of, what districts were actually carrying. But I haven't seen that in the last couple of years to know where they're actually at.
Other questions? Senator Scott?
Madam Chairman, that's accurate. That was the motivation to not force them to fritter away the federal stimulus that they got suddenly. But, Madam Chairman, it is useful in terms of the cash flow management, I think, to have the higher levels, and it doesn't compel them to spend at the end of the year, which is what they would do, spend on things that they might not otherwise buy. So I think it's a good tool. Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, on and for the bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions or comments on this bill? Okay, thank you, Senator Dockstader, unless you have anything else you want to add.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick summary then. That's, appreciate the assistance from those who've been in education for a long time, but it extends a sunset date, helps the districts with their operating balances, and allows the districts more control of their operations. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and open it up for public testimony. Does the department want to comment on this bill? Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Dickie Shaner speaking on behalf of Superintendent Degenfelder. For the reasons stated already in this committee, she's in support of this bill.
Okay. Questions for the department? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else that would like to comment on this bill? Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Boyd Brown. I'm the Wyoming Association of School Administrators Executive Director. Again, supporting this bill. Would suggest that we amend out the sunset date and allow school districts to continue to carry up to 30% over. Cash reserves are not so much a savings account, but the ability for a school district to run their business during lean times. And depending on whether you're an entitlement district or a recapture district, those funds run down at different times. You're all aware that recapture districts can get a loan so that they can get through those lean times at the end of the fiscal, or at the end of the calendar year. The snapshot for reserves is June 30th, which is problematic sometimes because of big payments that come in to some of our districts in June, depending on how things come into the county. So it's that one snapshot in time. Sometimes we'll have a lot more than we probably need to cash flow. Some of the things that we need cash flow for is all of the grants, whether it's a state grant or a federal grant, we have to spend that money up front and then get reimbursed for it. One of the things that has changed how much we can get in reserve is pulling special ed out, which is something we had to do for the state. It reduced the amount of money that we could keep to about 12% if it was 15%. So increasing that amount is really helpful for us. Otherwise, we'd be really short. Normally, all of our auditors tell us that we should have a larger reserve than the 15% to be able to take care of things. Let's see. I think there's the idea that we're trying to just save money. Sometimes that's probably true if there's some sort of thing that we're trying to get out there, but for the most part, it's just so that we can cash flow. And like I said, different districts, depending on whether you're entitlement, close to recapture, the times where you're short are different. The idea of when our money comes in from the county changes that as well. And with that, I'll answer questions and try to help you understand if you have any questions.
Questions for Mr. Brown? Yes, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. But I do have a question about that. I understand the cash flow needs, and that makes good sense, but I still do have concerns where if you build up a 30% reserve, that means that you have to have shorted your school district funding for some number of years, certain percentage, right? And we spend a lot of time here fighting over 1-2% ECAs, and we're talking about an aggregate 30% that the districts want the capacity to just set aside 30% of the budget and hold it for cash flow purposes. Those two concepts don't mesh in my mind, that you can advocate for both of those things. So can you provide a little more context?
Yeah,
Brown?
and whenever you start looking at cash reserves, they are one-time money. So you have to build them over time usually. And then if you have to spend them down, let's say you have excuse me, Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, you may have a out-of-district placement for a special ed kid, which would remove all of your cash reserves, and you're gonna have to build them over time again. I think some districts during the COVID and ESSER money that came in, they were able to build those funds. I would suggest that most of our districts have not been able to get too close to 30%. Some of them have creeped up there a ways, but most of them are probably, excuse me, right around 15 to 20%. And again, it depends on what happens with within the year as to whether they have to, if they have a big expenditure or something. And you don't build cash reserves quickly unless you have something that happens, or you wind up shutting down a school or getting rid of quite a few teachers because of where you're at. And you have to use those reserves to balance that too when you're going through declining enrollment. So again, you build them over time. Nobody does it instantly, and sometimes things happen that allow you to do that. Let's say you have 3 or 4 positions that you can't fill that are certified, and you have a substitute teacher in there all year, and you're paying a lot less. That gives you the opportunity to do that. But it takes time and it takes some work to get it done.
Follow-up?
Yeah, one quick follow-up. On the circumstance of an out-of-district placement, you'd be reimbursed for that, although I realize you're gonna have to wait a year, but you'll get 100% reimbursed through special education. So that would be a cash flow problem, but it wouldn't be a resource problem. Is that accurate?
Mr. Brown?
Madam Chair, so you would spend that money that first year. The next year you get that money back. You're probably gonna have that out-of-district placement that next year, so you're spending it on that again. So you don't replenish the money in your reserves.
Until afterwards, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Okay. Thank you for your testimony.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Anyone else that would like to testify on 137? Welcome, please introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jed Ciccarelli, Chief Financial Officer with Laramie County School District 1. I will just maybe provide a little bit of context to some of the points Dr. Brown made and hopefully address a few questions that Senator Rothfuss posed as well. You heard a little bit about the importance that cash reserves act as a fiscal tool for school districts, and certainly those cash flow issues are a big piece of that. Dr. Brown mentioned grants. I'll provide a little context. My school district, on a normal year, will receive about $20 million in federal funds for grants. All of those funds are on a reimbursement basis, and certainly our partners at the Department of Education work as hard as they can to make sure that when we expend those federal grants, that we can draw down those funds as quickly as possible, but it still requires us to cash flow those. As a matter of fact, I have about a $4.5 million revolving note just between my general fund and my federal grants, just to be able to cash flow those portions of operations. The same applies for capital construction. As you know, our school district is fortunate to be entering into some capital construction for new schools here in Laramie County School District 1. Similar to federal grants, we have to expend those funds and then seek reimbursement through school facilities. Again, they're great partners in ensuring that we get that money in a timely manner, but we have to have that money in the bank account in order to make those payments and then submit that pay application to the state. Dr. Brown mentioned the residential placements is certainly an issue. Our district spends in excess of $1 million, if not $2 million some years, just on student placements. It does take a year, as Senator Rothfuss mentioned, to receive those funds. We also have to wait for those funds to be parsed out over 10 payments the upcoming year as well. And Madam Chair, just a couple other points. Navigating the lien periods is very important. The mechanics of a cash reserve calculation are a snapshot in time. Our audited financial statements are reviewed as of June 30th to examine where we are in relation to that limitation. But as Dr. Brown mentioned, those cash reserves fluctuate over the course of the year. They ebb and flow. June 30th might be maybe one of the more inopportune times to examine that. To put it a little bit in more perspective, our last school foundation payment as an entitlement district comes in the middle of May. Our last treasurer payment comes at the end of June. So we are cash flowing until the next August, when we start to see the state entitlements payments come back online. Our treasurer payments don't come back in earnest until about November of the upcoming year. So every year I know that I'm going to be posting $11+ million of payroll a month, and I have to be able to meet that lien period over the course of that time and those fluctuations. And Madam Chair, just a couple other points. As Senator Rothfuss noted, 15% reserves has kind of been the Wyoming standard for a number of years. I would tell you that the demands on cash flow for a school district have changed a lot, not just because of the pandemic. Since the ad valorem changes for tax collections, candidly, it's difficult. When we are examining the resources we need to meet our guarantee, we're really looking at 3 years. We're looking at the local resources we collected the prior year. We're estimating what we might collect this year for 25 and 6 mil collections. And those adjustments, if we're off, won't happen until the 3rd year through tax excess and shortfall calculations. So if we miss that mark, or we get a surprise unanticipated payment from the treasurer in late June, the penalties are steep. As Senator Rothfuss noted, the penalties, that money goes back to the state. We lose those resources. So we have to thread that needle. And I would characterize the reserves as not so much as a savings account as that flexibility to kind of match those timing payments. And then lastly, to Dr. Brown's point again, one that I think would warrant a conversation on a more permanent fix is the removal of the special education component as how it's included in that calculation and that reserve amount. Again, my district as an example, we spend right around $40 million a year on special education services. So the moment, overnight, when that component was removed, I lost about $6 million of reserve capacity. By moving our cash reserves maybe in a more permanent manner to 30%, we can account for some of those fluctuations that are really just the unintended consequence of that removal of that component. And Madam Chair, happy to provide any additional context or answer any questions. I'm sure my colleague here might have some things to add as well.
Questions? I didn't catch your last name, by the way.
Madam Chair, Ciccarelli.
Ciccarelli, okay. Any questions for Mr. Ciccarelli? I have just one, just out of curiosity, because I know these out-of-state placements are extremely expensive. What's typical for your district in terms of those?
Madam Chair, some of the residential placements can be in excess of $200,000 per student. Even day treatment placements that could run 6 figures for us as well, non-residential day treatment placements.
And just as a follow-up, do you have an average of how many of those you might have in a particular year?
Madam Chair, it fluctuates. This past year, I know I can give you a dollar figure. We were about $1.4 million just in placements.
Other questions, Mr. Ciccarelli? Okay, thank you so much. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Matt Flett, Chief Financial Officer in Natrona County School District. Natrona County School District has kind of went back and forth on supporting this bill the last few years, and I'm here to tell you today we 100% support it. Since 21-13-313E was amended during the 2022 session to increase the cash reserve limit from 15 to 30, Natrona County School District has experienced some significant changes. The district has experienced a decrease of 850 students from the October 1, 2022 fall enrollment snapshot done by the Department of Education to our most recent October 1, 2024 fall enrollment snapshot. And we'll provide a little more context just from our district's point of view that maybe hasn't been touched on just yet to make it a little more real of why we support this bill. In fiscal year 24, our general fund staffing was right-sized to match our enrollment reduction by 7.5 certified staff. In our current fiscal year, FY25, we right-sized the general fund by 23.5 certified staff, 14 classified, and 2 administrators. For FY 2026, we are targeting to reduce the size of our general fund by another $4 to $4.5 million. Additionally, based on our enrollment forecasts, which we extrapolate into ADM funding, we are anticipating reducing the size of our general fund over the next 3 years by a total of $10 million. That amount will probably increase over the next 5 years. We are going to continue to right-size the district to match the district enrollment because that's what the taxpayers expect in an efficient delivery of public K-12 instruction in our district. To Senator Rothfuss's point, we're not trying to just bank money here. There's cash flow issues and the timing of right-sizing the district. So where is Natrona County School District currently with its cash reserves? We have been trying to manage our cash as close to 15% since the flexibility was increased because we knew there was a sunset date. At the end of FY24, our cash reserve balance was 17.4%. However, since the statute was amended to 30%, the SPED reimbursement, as alluded to earlier, was removed from the calculation. If we bring that back in, our ending cash percentage is 14.2%, so under the 15. So why are we in support of Senate File 137? As I previously stated, we have some hard upcoming decisions as a district to make. The type of decisions that may impact students, staff, families, and the community as a whole. By extending the 30% cash reserve limit, it allows us flexibility to make as soft of a landing as possible and to minimize the impact to students as we right-size the district. As a lot of you know, in this room, K-12 is unique. Depending on grade levels and cohort sizes, it might not be feasible to right-size the district at the same rate as our enrollment loss. Senate File 137 will allow us the ability to right-size the district in a prudent manner while relying on some additional cash resources if needed. Obviously, we're fully aware one-time cash reserves is not a sustainable method to pay ongoing expenditures. That's Budget 101. We all know that. However, if we could get the additional flexibility as we continue to right-size the district, and maybe if our cash balance floats up to 18, 19, 20%, if not a little more, so we can get through this next 1 to 5 to 6, 7 years as we right-size the district. Hopefully enrollment levels off in the next few years. It is definitely a tool we would welcome and support. It's just one less thing we have to worry about as we make some tough decisions within this district. So with that, we fully support this bill, and I stand by for questions as well.
Matt, again, I didn't catch your last name.
Flett.
Flett, okay. Any questions for Mr. Flett? The only one I have just is, I know it's tough to try to estimate numbers, particularly with enrollment. It seems like 850, that was a big hit. Do you anticipate other things going on? I don't know, is things going on in the oil patch or around your community that would maybe possibly, you would see another hit like this of students leaving the district?
Madam Chair, what we're looking at right now is really the decrease in the number of births in Natrona County. Calendar year 2024 was the first year-over-year increase in the number of births in the county since 2014. So that's starting to show up in our elementary cohorts.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Anyone else that would like to testify on Senate File 137, please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Brian Farmer, representing Wyoming School Boards Association. Madam Chair, I'd like to begin by thanking the sponsor of the bill for bringing this. Oftentimes, I come before you and I talk about local control, and I want to talk a little bit about the role of a school board trustee when it comes to managing finances and cash reserves, and why I believe it's important for local folks to have some ability, some flexibility to make decisions. Madam Chairman, school board members, we have this term trustee, a trustee, and a trustee has fiduciary duties. A fiduciary duty is a legal and an ethical responsibility to act in the best interest of the school district and in the best interest of its students. So among these fiduciary duties that a board member has is a duty of care. The duty of care is to act with the same care and prudence that an ordinary person would act under the circumstances. This duty of care means things like making informed decisions based upon available information, monitoring the finances of the school's operations, and seeking expert advice when it's necessary. Another of the fiduciary duties by which a trustee is bound is a duty of loyalty. That duty of loyalty is that the school trustee must act in the best interest of the school district and its students, and not for their own benefit or for any benefit of any special interest. So the next of the duties that I would mention is a duty of obedience. And that means that they must act in accordance with the law and with policies, regulations, so that they have to ensure that the district operates or complies with applicable laws and regulations, and that they follow established procedures for decision-making. So when we look at the budget, and I can speak from personal experience, I remember sitting down as a school board trustee asking the same kind of questions that Senator Olson is asking right now, asking the same kind of questions that Senator Rothfuss is asking right now. I took my duties and my responsibilities as a trustee very seriously, and I know that our board members from across the state do the same. So as they're looking at managing the district resources, they're thinking about the circumstances that are unique to their district today, and they're asking good questions to be that good steward of the public dollar, to make sure that they're managing that cash flow in a way that is significant or unique to their district. You just heard two of our larger districts that spoke about circumstances unique to their districts, and having that flexibility to respond to those. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would have been different stories for those districts. Dr. Brown alluded to the circumstances that some of our small districts find themselves in, where we have cash flow issues. And as you have a district that's looking at the simple fact of making payroll come summer months when the cash is not there. We're waiting for entitlement payments from the state. We're waiting for tax payments from the county. There are simple operations that the district must act in. And so having that flexibility to manage it as fits our local circumstance becomes really important. Senator Rothfuss asked a really good question about what about the obligation or the responsibility to spend your funds for your students today? And I think that's a great question. And I think in a perfect funding system, the dollar would be right there so we could do that. The dollar would be there so that when that obligation came in, we could pay for it. When there was a maintenance issue and you have to replace a boiler, I remember we had a brand new school. Brand new, so everything should have worked. And over the Christmas break, something happened that we had a pipe burst. Something froze, a pipe burst, and a brand new school had to be taken offline for a couple of weeks so we could fix it. We could deal with the emergency, with the eventuality. And so we had to have the funds to deal with that. To the degree we could get things reimbursed, we had things reimbursed. To the degree that things were able to be paid over time, we pay them over time. So there has to be some percentage of flexibility to deal with that, sort of in an intergenerational sort of approach. These dollars belong to our kids today, and these dollars belong to these kids as they move through the system. So how do we serve that kid in his or her 13 years in the system? We expend those dollars, but we expend them in a manner that fits the needs of the student and the district over time. So I think that there is some component that is an intergenerational component, as well as some component that serves the student today. So, Madam Chairman, I'm asking you to give some flexibility to local boards as they make these decisions. I'm asking you to think about how there are unique circumstances that happen in our different districts across the state, and to understand that when boards of trustees are asking these questions that you're asking, they are thinking, how do I act in accordance with my fiduciary duties to do what is best for my district and for my kids, and to be a good steward of that public dollar? No school district is looking just to accumulate a war chest. That would be unethical. That would be a violation of their fiduciary duty. But if they're looking at how to manage the resource to best serve the district and its kids, that is a tough decision, an operational decision that happens over time. One more piece that I'd just like to say before I close is one of the things that we get as a trustee is an annual audit. We have an audit of our finances, and oftentimes there's more than one audit that we're hearing from, perhaps the state, perhaps our external auditors, perhaps other entities. And it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating when there are audit findings and you hear that something's not operating well. And it is not an uncommon finding in an audit where the auditor says you have failed to meet generally accepted government accounting practices because you don't hold the necessary reserves for doing so. Oftentimes, we're told by our auditors, by our accountants, that this is not the best practice to hold minimal reserves or no reserves, that it is good accounting practice to have that reserve in place so that you can deal with those eventualities and you're not putting yourself in a precarious position. So we want to do what's best for our districts. We take our responsibility very seriously, and that's what a school board is elected to do, is to be that crucial eye, that crucial monitor of the fiduciary responsibility for the district. Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Farmer? Okay, thanks so much for your testimony. Anyone else in the room that would like to testify? Anyone online?
Not today, Madam Chairman.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll close public testimony. What's your pleasure on this bill? Okay, it's been moved by Senator Scott. Any discussion on the bill? There isn't much of a change here, so any possible amendments or anything that you think needs some work? I don't see any. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and take roll.
Madam Chairman, on Senate File 137, School Finance, Cash Reserves, do pass. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Olson?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Senator Scott?
Aye.
Chairwoman Schuler?
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay, that bill is passed, and Senator Dockstader, we'll let you take care of it on the floor. Thank you so much. Okay, the next bill for our consideration is Senate File 162, Education Block Grant Model Amendments. This is Senator Scott's bill, so take it away, Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, what this bill does is, in the education block grant, isolate the teacher reimbursement, and including the benefits and whatnot, and essentially silo that, provides that that's a separate part of it. The money can't be moved that's originally allocated to teachers, can't be moved to other purposes. Does permit, if you look at the language, and that language starts at the bottom of page 1, and the bottom of page 2, the provision that allows the movement of money from the rest of the block grant into teachers. But it's not allowed to take the money originally intended for teachers and move it to the rest of the block grant. Madam Chairman, the motivation behind this was that in previous recalibration, when the Senate wanted to make some reductions, they were promptly assailed for reducing the number of teachers, even though the reductions were based on the use of teacher funding elsewhere. And so we wanted to protect the teachers from that sort of thing. And there was an allegation that some of the districts were systematically moving money from teachers, from the so-called ghost teachers, to other purposes, including growing the bureaucracy. So it was a twofold thing, both to prevent removal of the teacher funds and to prevent the political threats to do that when there was reductions proposed elsewhere. This is picked up off language that was drafted at that time. I would point out, Madam Chairman, there's an exception, page 2, line 9, covers the smaller school districts where you have, frankly, intermingling of roles where teachers can do other things as well as teach. And for that sort of thing. And then there's, in the back of the bill, there's a number of data collection efforts to ensure the enforcement of this. So that's, Madam Chairman, that's a quick summary of the bill and its genesis.
Questions for Senator Scott? Yes, Senator Rothfuss?
Thanks, Madam Chairman. I was wondering on page 2, lines 9 and 10, why charter schools are accepted. I see the small school justification.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Scott.
Again, it's a relatively small numbers and people having roles that are both teaching and administrative at the same time. And particularly you get a charter school like the one in Chugwater, you get that in spades. But in general, you need to have an exemption for the outfits with smaller numbers.
Madam Chairman,
Follow
but
up?
most of our alternative schools in the state aren't small, though. We have a couple small ones, but most of them are full regular sized schools.
Senator Scott?
Madam Chairman, certainly in Natrona County, our alternate schools are relatively small compared to some of the rest of the schools. But that's what's going on.
Okay.
It's protecting small schools.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Senator Scott? I'm glad you elaborated on that because I had that highlighted as well, wondering what the, the nexus was for it, so. Anything else? Okay. In that case, we'll go open it up for public testimony on Senate File 162, Education Block Grant Model Amendments. Anyone that had Department of Ed, anything that you'd like to add to this bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Dickie Shaner speaking on behalf of State Superintendent Degenfelder. She wanted just to mention that she definitely appreciates the importance of making sure that money goes to teachers in the block grant. But, we've had another bill that's running through the legislature sort of restricting the CTE supply money in the block grant. And then now this too, this is gonna be over 50% of the block grant to districts with exceptions, and just wanted to note that maybe at this point, something this big might be better considered in the totality of a recalibration discussion versus just a bill right now. That was
Question? Oh,
what she
I'm
wanted
sorry,
to share.
go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
Senator Scott, did you have a question?
Madam Chairman, just a response to that. The thought was that if we put it in the statute now, then it would be dealt with during the recalibration, and that would assist in getting it to work right, and we could make any adjustments that were needed in the process of the recalibration.
Okay. Mr. Shaner, anything else?
Understood. Thank you.
Okay.
Nothing else.
Any other questions for Mr. Shaner? Okay, thanks for your testimony. Anyone else that would like to testify on this bill? Please come forward. Welcome. Good Friday to you.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, Tate Mullen, Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. appreciate the intent, but I'm struggling to see how this protects teachers' salaries, as the model salary is well below what our actual salaries are. So when we pull them out, we are still underfunding those salaries. Additionally, my understanding is that we aren't pulling from teacher salaries to fund other pieces. It's usually the vice versa, right? We're usually pulling from other areas to fund that shortfall in our educator salaries. I agree that I think that there's some discussion to be had in recalibration. I think that this is, you know, a big undertaking that we're starting right now. I don't think that the timing for this is necessary. I think if it is the will of the body to do this, there are some adjustments I think that need to be made. I think first and foremost, if we're going to pull teacher salaries out of the model, all the WEA has ever asked is that we fully fund teacher salaries in compliance with our constitution and with a cost-based model. So adjust those to reflect actual salaries at the 85th percentile, not the 75th percentile. We have long took some issues with Dr. Christina Stoddard's methodology in terms of the hours worked. We actually have provided this committee in previous years and during litigation a report by the RAND Corporation that actually shows that her methodology on that factor has a shortfall. So teachers do work more, which is part of the calculation for that 75th and 85th percentile. I think additionally, there should be a discussion about including an automatic ECA for our educators, our teacher salaries. And this is to ensure that if we're looking to protect teacher salaries, let's make sure that we're fully funding them now and well into the future. And again, that's all we've ever asked for, is that we fully fund our teacher salaries and our education model. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Mullen? Okay, I guess not. Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Anyone else who would like to testify? Come on up. Who would like to go first today? All right, Mr. Brown, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Boyd Brown, Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. Again, I would suggest that when we followed the money that was allocated for teachers, again, we don't hire as many teachers as the model generates because we pay much better. But the amount of money usually runs somewhere between about 98% to 102% of the money that is allocated for teachers is spent on teachers. And again, that's about as close as we can get, projecting where we're at, knowing that we're going to have some openings and other things as we go through there. One of the things that your consultants, Mr. Pikus and Dr. Pikus and Dr. Auden would tell you is that it is a block grant, and it should continue to be a block grant that allows local districts the flexibility to be able to do what they need to do with that money. The idea of pulling teachers out and making them a specific grant would really tie where districts can go with that. About 85 to 90% of the money that we spend in each district is personnel, and the largest chunk of that is our certified staff. So I think that it really would hamstring districts to not have that flexibility. So I would suggest, if you're thinking about it, that we look at it through the recalibration as we move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian, or if you have specific questions for me, I would be happy to answer those.
Questions for Mr. Brown? Okay, seeing none, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. I'd like to echo a lot of what Dr. Brown said with his comments. We've had a lot of discussion about this, and so it's an issue that we both feel strongly about. Madam Chair, I worked for the Wyoming legislature in the days following the Campbell decisions, and as the legislature was struggling to find a solution, seeking to find a path forward. Certainly Senator Scott was here and part of the discussions, and it's been a long effort to try to find what's the right way to do this. And we really kind of settled around this notion of a block grant. And the block grant being really important because no school district really met the prototypical schools on which our models have been based. Our funding models based off of this sort of Mayberry prototypical model that doesn't match the reality of our school districts. Unfortunately, over time, we've really not kept up with making adjustments to that model. We've gotten to a place where we've had further and further deviation between the reality of what we do and what exists in that model itself. As a matter of fact, Madam Chair, we find ourselves in litigation today as a state that's asking about funding of some of these components. And Madam Chair, one of the things that has not been litigated through any of the school finance litigations is the preciseness of any of the components of the model. We just look at, does the model generate a sufficient resource for funding? And as it generates that sufficient resource for funding, then we have the local school districts determining what's the best allocation of those resources. As Dr. Brown said, when you look at the dollars that are allocated for personnel across the model, dollars allocated for personnel, school districts are spending 90% or more on personnel. When you're looking at those dollars, that report has come to the Education Committee or to the Recalibration Committee in recent years. Each year you look at the trend lines, and on those trend lines of how we're doing, what we're spending, toward the bottom, there's a line that says, what does the state fund? And so what the state funds is among the bottom when compared to our regional counterparts, and that is among the bottom of the nations and the state. But when we look at what states spend, we spend toward the top, not at the top, but toward the top among our regional states. So that is more of a reflection of market. And as a matter of fact, that is exactly what the consultants in the 2018-2017 recalibration said is the market. They said what you're paying now to your employees is the market, not what is in the model. And so consultants had advised the legislature that that was the appropriate market for salaries. So now we have this disparity of what we fund and what we pay. And that's not just teachers, that's across the board. As a matter of fact, in the last recalibration, the consultants talked about that deviation, and the greatest deviation between what we fund and what we pay was not teacher salaries, but was administrator salaries. Madam Chairman, I'm going to unfortunately leave you next week for a little bit to go out into Wyoming. I'm going to spend time with a couple of school districts that are currently seeking new superintendents. Madam Chair, we already have 5 school districts in the state that are seeking new superintendents. That's an unusually high number for this time of year, but it's reflective of some change and some transition that's happening in education across the country. I can tell you in working with these school districts that today we are receiving 1/3 of the number of applications that we used to receive just 3 years ago for superintendents. The market, what we are offering, what we are paying, is indicating that fewer and fewer people are seeking these positions. And so this is a question for recalibration. This is a question of how do we get our model right? And if we were perfect, if we were living in the world with that perfect model, then I would agree with the premise of this bill. Spend the money in the model allocated for teachers on teachers. But the model is so far from perfect. It needs fixed. And so this doesn't help with that. This just puts us in a position where school districts are hamstrung until we do fix the model in their ability to actually manage their resources, to hire those good superintendents to come in and get those people to help lead the districts so that we do have good stewardship, good financial resources, good management of the school districts. So I'm asking for some flexibility, for some help as we get to that point of recalibration, saying, how do we fix a model that needs fixed? With that, I stand for questions, and thank you for your time.
Questions for Mr. Farmer? Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. You know, on this discussion, and it's one that we've been having for a number of years, one of the concerns that some legislators express with adding more money to the funding model is, oh, it won't get spent on teachers. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that tends to be the discussion. And in the discussion, this concept of categorical comes up fairly often, categorical salaries for educators. And what I've typically responded with is, if we were to fund at market the correct number of teachers, right? And as you both know, the model funding funds 20% more teachers at a 20% lower salary effectively. And we are where we are. So as I think Tate pointed out, we're in the right around 98 to 102% of that tends to go forward. But we've seen those numbers in every recalibration, what it would cost to provide the market salary for the correct number of teachers, and then we would have the correct number of teachers. And my suggestion was, if there's a desire to make that categorical, where you're actually fully funding it, if that's the trade-off, that probably would be worth it. And so I was just interested in hearing your thoughts on that. If that's the necessary trade to actually fully fund teachers as we're going through it, would that be rational, or do we still really need to hold to the full block grant? Because I think that's the type of thing that might move us towards support for legitimate funding for teachers.
Go ahead, either one of you, if you have a
Madam Chair, I
thought?
think the hypothetical nature and the reality of plans can be far apart. I think, as I noted, we have not examined the adequacy of components through the course of litigation. So we've never gotten there. So in the days of MAP, in the early days of PICUS and Auden, through other recalibrations, when we look at one school district, it might fit. Maybe that's our mid-sized school district. Maybe that's Park County School District number 1. Maybe that's Mayberry. But we look at those that are smaller, and it tends not to work. And as you know, we looked at some very good mathematical calculations of looking at funding on curves instead of funding on cliffs. And that kind of model concept certainly is closer to true and adequate funding based upon circumstance. The same thing happens when you get to the large size. Sometimes that gets deviation from the model so far that it doesn't work. So it would depend on the model of whether or not that is a practical path forward. As you know, we've had some consultants in the past that have looked at that. So Augenblick, Palich and Associates, that 2017-2018 recalibration really was the most comprehensive look that we've had at alternative approaches, alternative ways of funding, at the adequacy of funding. And as you noted, it had a much higher price tag than where we found ourselves. And so in that trade-off, I think it becomes difficult. One of the reasons I think people say, why didn't the legislature do something better in 2005 and 2010 and 2015, 2020? I think at the end of the day, the recalibration committees looked at it and said, when we look at the adequacy of the resource, we fund adequate resource, but the only way to make that work is to allow flexibility to the local district in the management of that adequate resource. If we want a perfect model, and if we have a perfect model, then it is possible to hold more accountability to to the category, because then it becomes both a funding model and a spending model. It is a perfected model to explain the deviations that you experience under different circumstance. When it's not that way, then we can fight over this component, but if we fight on this component, we might mess up this component here. If we fight on this component, we might mess up this component here. It is the totality of the resource generated that we have said has been adequate over the last several years. And that's where the recalibration committee has come to. And districts, when asked, have said, you know what, we're getting an adequate resource for the most part if we have the ability to manipulate that, and if that resource is adjusted for inflation.
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, again, I would echo a lot of what Brian has talked about. The one thing that I would suggest is the model's not perfect. We don't resource everything that we have to spend. A couple off the top of my head. One is insurance, property casualty insurance and different things like that are not resourced. If we're going to have school resource officers, we pay for those. Most of us pay for more nurses or more counselors as well. So I think if we had, like Brian said, if we had a perfect model that was a perfect spending model rather than a resource model, I would say yes. But it would be very difficult to say yes, knowing that each one of our districts are so much different that they probably need that flexibility. Each one of our districts has locally elected school boards who will be held accountable for us to make sure that we pay our teachers what they should get. And there's not one district out there that's paying at the level that we're funded for teachers. All of us are paying almost $6,000 to $8,000 more than the model generates for our teachers. So again, I think it would be very difficult for us to support that.
Very quick question, this can go to both of you. Obviously, we're going into recalibration, but that list of unfunded necessities, we talk a lot about that, but it would be handy perhaps over the next few months for that to get put together in just a nice little one-pager, so that we've got that as we go into recalibration. So that's just an ask to the two of you unrelated to the legislation. It would be great to have that one-pager available before we get to recal.
Madam Chair, I think as Dr. Brown pointed out and Senator Rothfuss sort of indicates, if we want to look at that list, a passage of this bill might mean that things like school resource officers can't be paid for anymore, because that may be something that a district is using its flexibility of using some dollars in this allocation. So passage of this certainly risks things on that list, like school resource officers.
Anyone else who would like to testify on this bill? Please come forward. Welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jed Ciccarelli, Chief Financial Officer for Laramie County School District 1. I promise to be brief. I'll just mention a couple of things with regards to the previous speaker's comments. Teacher compensation represents roughly 50 to 60% of the block grant. And maintaining the flexibility of that block grant is important for school districts like mine to meet our local needs and priorities. And maybe to provide a little bit of an example, in years where we were not receiving external cost adjustments or they were not sustained, we saw our classified or hourly staff fall further and further behind the labor market. There was one year in particular, we worked with our teaching negotiations group, and they made concessions to ensure that our classified group could be brought a little closer to the labor market as through that process. By restricting those resources that are provided in a block grant form, we wouldn't have had that same flexibility to work to meet some of those local needs. And I just quickly mentioned, this question has been asked before. One of our favorite acronyms in Wyoming School Finance is the CREW report, which has been presented to the Joint Education Committee, Appropriations, Recalibration Committees. And Senator Rothfuss might remember that there was an addendum provided for a number of years that looked at kind of what was the aggregate amount that the block grant provided for teacher salaries, but in other categories as well, and what was spent, taking into account where districts might hire less and pay them more. And the outcome of that was that school districts were pretty congruent with the model. My district, it can fluctuate. There are years I spend 106% of what the funding model provided for teacher salaries. There's some years that it was 98.5%. And it's going to have a lot to do with the inputs and the variables at the time. Benefits is another side of the equation. We're provided benefits through a proxy. Our district maintains our own health insurance plan. There's some years it's less than the states. There's some years that it's more than the states. There's some years that our plan varies even in the options, whether it's single coverage or family coverage. And so we're never going to be hitting that exact same amount that the funding model provides. And this would just further restrict our ability to kind of adjust to those local needs and those fluctuations over time. So Madam Chair, happy to address any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Ciccarelli?
Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Jed, thanks, and obviously you've had a lot of experience with these numbers. It has always seemed to me that districts end up targeting that 100% effectively to the best of their ability realistically, where they end up having to change their class size to accommodate the fact that they have to pay more based on the current market rate for teachers relative to what the model pays, but that by and large, all of the districts are hitting right around that 100%, even though there is that flux. And both from your role here back to your role with the state, do you remember any substantial deviations? Because I really don't remember substantial deviations, although I do feel like the needle might move back and forth from district to district. Is that your experience as well?
Mr. Ciccarelli?
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, that's correct. There's certainly going to be some categories where you see fluctuations. My district hires more paraprofessionals than the funding model allocates, but we also hire less administrators. So at the end of the day, Madam Chair, it boils down to simple math. We are provided with a block grant. We have to live within the means of those block grant dollars. Generally speaking, if you look at it on the aggregate, school districts were right around that 100% of what the funding model provided for compensation.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else in the room? Okay. Ashley, anybody online?
No, Madam Chairman.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. What's your pleasure on this bill, committee? Okay, the bill's been moved by Senator Olson. Any discussion?
Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Back on the origins of this bill, in 2021, the committee, the Republicans in the committee heard quite a bit from the Republican senators that had been in the recalibration, that there were many teacher positions that were not being funded, the so-called ghost teachers, and that their feeling was that a significant amount of that money was being diverted, particularly to administration. As we looked into it, clearly the ghost teachers were there. A significant amount of that money was being used to increase the teachers' salaries, but that appeared to vary significantly by district. And clearly, I think some of it was being diverted to administrative purposes. And then Senator Beitman had the creative idea to do just exactly this. That's where it came from. And we embraced it, but couldn't get anywhere with our colleagues elsewhere in the building. So that's the origin of it. I think a fair amount of the diversion does stay within the teacher category to get the salaries where they are, because clearly the model is different from what we're doing in reality on that score. And that's why we do have the flexibility to move money into this from elsewhere. I think that it is worth doing this and worth doing this at this time, because it will force the recalibration to take a harder look at what reality really is in the teacher area.
Other comments or questions? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. You know, I just don't think it's necessary at this time, although during the recalibration, we can talk through putting constraints on the block model, but the block grant model. But there's a reason that in the end, each time, the recalibration committee hasn't done that. We haven't done it for all these years, and that is the fact that the model does not fully fund all of the components that need to be in the model. And, you know, I've served multiple times on recalibration, and at the end, we have a recommendation. That recommendation comes closer to the reality of what the expenditure should be for based on our consultants' recommendations. And then it also comes with a price tag that has been $35, $50, $70 million more than what we were paying. And so we've rejected it each time. Rejected it knowing that continuation of the current funding still, when given on a block grant, allows the districts to address those needs, like as we heard, school resource officers, where some use them, school counselors, psychologists, different numbers of paras, right? Schools do things differently and are looking for innovative solutions to do things differently, to try and use those resources as well as they can. That flexibility is essential. But it is my experience that at the end of it all, when you look at the math and you multiply number of teachers by average teacher salary and you incorporate the benefits, it ends up just being roughly equal to the right answer on teachers, but with some flexibility there, district by district, and it certainly does vary. So the idea that we want to constrain this really is just, I think, anecdotal discussion and narrative as opposed to evidence. We literally have the data for every single school district for longer than I've been in the legislature, for every one of these numbers, and we could look at all of this data. In fact, that wouldn't even be that hard because it's so easily addressable from the Crew report, and we did have a number of years. I was just trying to pull one up, but I couldn't find it on my phone quickly enough. One of the Crew reports that gives these numbers statewide, and we did have some deviations, but the deviations were seldom on the teacher side. They were in some of the other categories. A good example of that was librarian, where librarian gets skewed a little bit in a lot of reporting by school districts because they end up using those librarian numbers to provide resources for information technology, for example. There were also deviations, as mentioned, in admin, depending on the district. But this is kind of one of those discussion points that it's a great talking point for the coffee shop. We can all get upset about it that admins are being paid too much, but when you actually look at the magnitude of admin pay relative to the magnitude of the model, it's just not a big deal. It falls into the same category as when we hear about, we saw the bus drive by and there were only 6 students on it, so our transportation budget must be entirely due to empty buses driving around the state. And then we actually look into that, and that transportation budget is, I don't know, it's like less than 10% of the overall budget for travel and activities, and over 90% is just driving routes around the neighborhood. So it turns out to be a great storyline, good for the news, good for the conversations with somebody shaking their fist and angry. But then when you actually look at the numbers, it's all working out just fine. So, Madam Chairman, I think we should just continue this conversation in recalibration instead of putting this restriction on. And I'll note, this is effective immediately, right? So this isn't a let's study this or let's get this started so that we can work it in recal. This goes into effect immediately in Section 3. And as a result, you start constraining districts that would then have to go back in and literally potentially change their budget as of the end of the legislative session. They would have to re-budget. That sounds like an awful lot of work, unnecessary work as we go into a recalibration. When honestly what we should be focused on, which I think we've known was the challenge for a lot of years with regard to teachers and teacher salary, is this challenge where our model salary is woefully insufficient. It's 20% less than our market. It's 20% less than what we pay. Therefore, because they're targeting the 100%, they hire 20% fewer teachers, roughly. This is kind of the average of what you look at statewide. And then we complain that they're not hiring all their teachers as part of the storyline, right? Oh my gosh, you've got these ghost teachers, so you're wasting money. No, it's pretty much a one-to-one match on those dollars. It really is. We underfund teachers, and so as a result, we see an undersupply of teachers because you have a finite pie of resources available. Madam Chairman, I just don't see this bill solving any problems at all, or coming close to it. But I do see it creating new problems that the districts will have to address ahead of recalibration that don't improve the quality of education at the schools. They don't improve the funding. They don't improve the bureaucracy. There's no gain from passing this bill. There's only additional bureaucracy and headache as the districts try to comply if somehow they're not complying at this point in time, as well as from the administration side. So while I, from a conceptual standpoint, really do support the idea that I want all of the dollars allocated to teaching to go to teaching, I think they're already doing it through the current system. And I think we should spend more time focused on how do we make sure that we're paying sufficient salaries to get as many teachers as we want, so that we can have zero ghost teachers at the school, which, again, this doesn't address. This further exacerbates the problem. So I really have concerns with this approach at this time, but I'm certainly sympathetic to the interest of ensuring that we have fully staffed teachers at schools.
Other comments? Okay. With that, I think we'll go ahead and take roll call.
Madam Chairman, on Senate File 162, Education Block Grant Model Amendments, Senator Brennan,
Aye.
Senator Olson,
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss,
No.
Senator Scott,
Aye.
Chairwoman Schuler.
No.
3 aye, 2 no.
Okay, that is passed, and Senator Scott will sure take it up on the floor. And let's move on to the next bill. Senate File 123, School Finance Competitive Grants for Crossing Guards. This is Senator Brennan's bill. We'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is one of kind of a two-part response for crossing guards, and really this comes down to the safety of our kids. We have had in my district a child a few years ago that was killed in a crosswalk, and his mom has worked endlessly and tirelessly since then to make sure that that doesn't happen to any other kids. And she's gone to the district asking them to have a district-sponsored crosswalk program, and they said no. And as the legislature looked into, as the delegation from this county looked into that, we found that there was 2 reasons why the district felt like they couldn't do that. And one of those we've addressed in another bill, which was immunity. This one addresses their concern of not having the financial means to do that. So what this does is it creates a grant program for school districts who want to have a crosswalk for our K through 12 public school systems. And again, just keep in mind that this really has to do with the safety of our kids in making sure that they get to and from school without injury or, in the case of some, death. So for school district year 25-26 through school district 27-28, a school district may apply to the State Department of Education for assistance training to educate volunteers and faculty, pay wages for faculty, and purchase equipment for crossing guard programs for schools located within the district. So it's Part A tells us what we can do. No district can have a grant greater than $10,000 per school year. They have to submit an application to the Department of Education. And then in subsection B, we, Romanet I on page 2, lines 19, we have that a proposal documenting the need for crossing guards and a plan for expenditure for the grant amounts shall identify at a minimum a list that is then on page 3, which would include the intersections where the volunteers or the employees may be, the number of hours for volunteers or employees, the training and education requirements, equipment needed. Then Romanet 2 is other necessary information that would be required by the department no later than August 1st of each applicable school year. And following review of applications submitted under this section, the Department of Education shall notify applicant school districts of its decision to award or deny a grant applicable, and shall provide each applicant district a written statement of the reason for approving, or denying the application. Each district receiving the grant will report to the Department of Education the expenditure of the amount awarded under this section no later than August 1st of each school year. And then we have the ability for the Department of Ed, along with the Department of Transportation, to promulgate rules. And then section 2 is the appropriation. There would be appropriated $4,950,000 from the Public School Foundation Program account to the department for the grant program. And no more than $1,650,000 of that would be expended in each year. And this would begin for July 1 of 2025. And this appropriation would be for July 1, 2025 through June 30, 2022, but it would be included in the standard budget. And this would go into effect immediately.
Questions for Senator Brennan on this bill? Senator Scott?
Madam Chairman, is this a Laramie County particular problem, or is this more statewide? I know in my community, I see a fair number of these crossing guards functioning. Is this just more incompetence by the Laramie One School District, or is this something that is much broader statewide?
Senator Brennan?
I think it's both, and I know that it is definitely a Laramie County School District problem, but I believe that we have heard stories in other places, and there's other, within the state, there's a bunch of places where kids have to cross some major roads, and I believe there's other communities that there is a problem with this in, that could benefit from this.
Yeah, Senator Brennan, that was one of the questions I had. I just assumed that most districts paid for their crossing guards, but Laramie County does not. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so this is optional. They can, put in the application for the grant, any district that would like to. And again, 2028 is, the money should be gone by then, hopefully, or possibly.
Possibly.
Other questions from the community, or excuse me, from the committee? It's not a committee, it is a community, actually, but no other questions? Okay. I didn't open it up for public testimony then. Anyone that would like to testify on this bill, please come forward. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Want to begin by thanking the bringer of the bill. Appreciate this being brought. In light of the last discussion we had, guess what? There is not funding for crossing guards. That doesn't exist in the model. It might have come from other parts of the model, but as we move more toward categorical grants, we don't have funds for things like crossing guards. That's not provided. So I think the question is really about how do we protect the safety of our students as they get to school and they come home from school. And in some communities, they are diverting their resources from other places to provide for crossing guards. In some places, we have parents or other community members who are simply giving of their time, volunteering their time and their effort to provide this service for schools to ensure that our kiddos are safe. And I think somebody might say, well, why is it even necessary? Don't we have speed limit signs? Don't we already tell people, slow down in a school zone? Madam Chair, we don't have law enforcement across Wyoming to enforce those. They don't have the resource to sit there at all of our schools. You look at Laramie County School District #1, and there's over 30 schools in the district. And so how do we maintain that safe way to school? How do we make sure that kiddos get there safely? I think this allows for schools on that case-by-case basis to say, what is our circumstance? Do we have a major roadway? Do we have unsafe areas by us? And then how can we address that? Madam Chair, the question came up, is this only a Laramie 1 problem? And the answer sadly is no. Madam Chair, we have had some serious incidents with students in Fremont County. We've had some serious instances with students in Park County. We've had unfortunate experiences where there were young people on their way to school or on their way home from school that were involved in pedestrian vehicular accidents. And in some cases, as Laramie 1, with tragic result. And so what is that kiddo's life worth? What is that time worth? And I think the answer is that it is appropriate to provide funding. It is appropriate to provide resource. It is appropriate to say where needed that we can expend some extra dollars to provide safe ways to school for school children. Madam Chair, I thank you for the opportunity to testify. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Farmer? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else? Please come forward.
Madam Chairman, Boyd Brown, Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. Again, want to thank the bringer of the bill. Believe that school safety for our students should be first priority, and we try to do that. Believe this will give the opportunity for some districts to expand that. I do believe that there's a bill also that would allow crossing guards to be part of the Governmental Immunity Act, which ties right in with this. So really appreciate that and just support the bill, and as it moves forward, we'll support it that way too. So with that, I'd answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Brown? Okay, thank you so much. Anyone else that would like to testify on this bill? Okay, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. Committee, what's your thoughts on this bill?
Move bill.
Okay, bill's been moved by, take your pick, I think Senator Rothfuss, okay. Any discussion on this bill? Discussion? Yes, Senator Olson.
Madam Chairman, I should have asked this up front to Senator Brennan, but I do have a question about how this is funded. It's interesting to me to appropriate the full amount and then restrict it to 1.6 million per year, as opposed to just appropriating 1.6 million a year and then sunsetting it after 3 years. The only reason, and there's not really guidance on what happens after the 3 years. So that's my question is, does the need for the program go away in 3 years, or you're hoping to revisit it in 3 years? And then did you think about, or did you have any discussion about that appropriation being just annually versus the lump sum? I'm not sure why we would release our funds to the Department of Education. It just sits in, it doesn't, an account is not specified, so I'm not even sure where it sits, if that makes sense.
Senator Brennan, any answers for those questions?
Senator Olson, those are excellent questions that I think I have not had deep discussion on all of that appropriation, and I would be happy to have some discussions, and we could take amendments, and we could, as I was looking over this morning, there isn't necessarily a sunset, but we do have like these 3 kind of years, which I would be more than happy to look at this for 3 years and see what comes of it, or continue it. I think either one is in, as far as, I think dividing it up, thought there in the drafting was just that, you know, you can use half of it for 1 year and half of it for another year, but we can.
Any follow-up? Yeah, Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, I suspect what's going on is they're trying to get it funded for long enough that it continues until the recalibration is fully done and implemented, or not implemented, as the case may be, so it get funded through the next biennium. I suspect that the Appropriations Committee will weigh in on this one, and frankly, probably better for this committee to leave that to the tender mercies of appropriations.
Okay, good comments. Senator Olson?
Madam Chairman, can I ask the department, I'm curious what the department's plan will be to do with the appropriation, because they have to put it somewhere, and I'm not sure where they hold it because the bill doesn't specify.
Department of Education, you have any comments on that, or you just want to?
Or you want to
Take a
punt it
stab
until
at
it
it?
goes to appropriations?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Olson, we'll get back to you on that.
It's a good answer, good answer. All right, any other questions? Okay. All right, well, if there's no other comments or questions, no amendments, see none, we'll go ahead and take a roll on the bill.
Madam Chairman, on Senate File 123, school finance, competitive grants for crossing guards, do pass. Senator Brennan,
Aye.
Senator Olson,
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss, Senator Scott,
Aye.
Chairwoman Schuler.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay, that bill is passed, and Senator Brennan will be taking that up on the floor, so, good job. All right, we have one more bill that we can kind of at least get a start at. I don't know if we can finish it, but we're gonna take a look at it today. This would be Senate Joint Resolution 6, School Capital Construction Constitutional Amendment. Again, this is Senator Scott's bill, so we'll turn the time over to him. Gets double
Chairman.
duty today.
Let me pass out the sheet on what we've been expending, and ask Senator Rothfuss if he could put the balance of the sheets out in the end of the table where the audience can get at them. Madam Chairman, let me just quickly summarize where we are on this particular constitutional amendment and what the motivation for it is. The material I'm passing out shows that what we've been doing, the Campbell decisions switched us from the local bond issue system that we had used since statehood to a system of state funding of school capital construction. We have spent, since the Campbell decisions, we have spent on major capital construction and what Mr. Wilmarth and the LSO has characterized as minor capital construction components, a total of $3.4 billion since those Campbell decisions. When you exclude the first biennium, where we're just getting started, the average since then has been 261 million a biennium capital construction, not including the major maintenance. And then the major maintenance is not included in that earlier figure I gave you. The current biennium is estimated at $313 million. a biennium, most of which has already, I think, been appropriated last year. It's very expensive, and we funded it for years with coal lease bonus monies we were receiving from the feds. That money is gone, just flat gone, and it isn't going to come back. And I think that, if nothing else, that tells us we have to do something differently. We are starting to fund it out of the school foundation program. And Madam Chairman, I think that's a very bad idea, because I think it will sooner or later start impinging on our ability to fund school operations. Now, we'll probably make most of that good from the reserve account and essentially from the general fund. But I don't think we can afford to continue it. So that's in good part the motivation for the bill. The second motivation is that my observation is that in the old days, and I watched this growing up, so I go back into the 50s and 60s, Madam Chairman, at least in my district, the school district could always pass a bond issue when they really needed it. But when they gold-plated it, the voters would vote it down. And they had a pretty good sense of when it was what was needed and when it wasn't. And their judgment really was very good. With the current setup, the Supreme Court really has given us a pork barrel system, because every legislator that I know of feels they have to defend their home school district most of the time. Nobody really knows enough to say no to somebody else's school district. And besides, it would be remembered if you did. And that's the classic pork barrel system. And looking at what was constructed not only in my district, but a number of the other districts in the state, we've built some very nice buildings. Characterizing them as palaces is a matter of judgment, Madam Chairman, and you can use your own judgment as to how much we have spent more than we would have if it had been done by local bond issues, where people whose taxes would go up to pay for the bonds make the judgment. Make your own estimate on that. Mine is that we have spent maybe 2/3 more than we would have otherwise. So this is what the constitutional amendment does, and I'll go through it almost in a word by word, because it is constitutional, Madam Chairman. But it says that we'll go back to a local capital construction as a local responsibility. It puts in a mandatory equalization because, there was a reason. Forget the legal reasoning for a moment. There was a substantive reason why the Supreme Court needed to do what it did. A number of the school districts that don't have large mineral resources or the large residential values that, say, Teton County has, were unable to do things that they really needed to do without exorbitant local mill levies, Madam Chairman, or in some cases without running up against the constitutional limit that's been there, I believe, since statehood, of limiting bonded indebtedness for school district to 10% of the assessed valuation. And Madam Chairman, this amendment deals with both. Looking at the substance of the amendment, Madam Chairman, and I'm not going to pay attention to the ballot statement or the introduction, but when you look on page 2, the legislature is going to provide by law a system subject to the following. First, local school districts primarily responsible, that's lines 7 and 8 on page 2. Lines 11, 16 on page 2 is the decision of the voters is final. And you can't, nobody else can require the district or the state to do capital construction that's rejected by the voters. The outfit that might do that would be a court. So that's to preserve the purity of the decision of the local. And then the mandatory equalization, lines 18 through 23, cost of paying the bonds and interest equalized. School district mill levy does not exceed what the mill levy would be if the district had an assessed valuation equal to the state average per person, assessed valuation. So a per capita thing with then the census, and we'd probably have some choice, Madam Chairman, as to which federal census information to take. 'Cause they do preliminary estimates during the 10 years, and we could deal with that by statute as to which one we take. But use the federal census as a source of the population. And the effect of that is that most of the school districts will be getting some equalization because our property tax wealth is so concentrated in a few school districts. Campbell County, Converse County, the Jonah Field and Sublette County, Sweetwater County, and Teton County with their residential. And that might be starting to spread to a few places like the district in the Star Valley. But most of us would get an equalization. I suspect my county would be close to the state average. But that would be an equalization system that would be fair. But it would mean that anyone who was voting on a school bond issue would have a significant personal increase in their property tax as the mill levy would go up. And classic, I don't like the expression skin in the game, but that's what it's all about. Madam Chairman, then's a provision on page 3, and there is a provision on page 2, line 9, and page 3, line 2, where under certain financial conditions, you could envision a system where bond funding becomes irrational. I think in times of extreme inflation, Madam Chairman, and you might well go to a special purpose sales tax or some other means of funding. This being constitutional amendment, we allow for that by the use of that phrase by other means, just in case that sort of thing happens, so we wouldn't have to amend the Constitution. I've heard a 1-cent sales tax proposed for that. I don't know that it's ever been used. And I don't think we've had an inflation that's high enough to really justify that, but we could sometime, Madam Chairman. So that's why that's there. Financing the equalization on page 3, lines 4 and following, may include appropriations or dedicated sources of funds. That's the typical way we've done this sort of thing. And shall include, if necessary, a statewide mill levy at a rate to ensure payment of the equalization. That last phrase, Madam Chairman, is absolutely essential, because if you don't put that in, then the bond council is going to advise you can't count on the bonds being paid back and nobody would buy them. So it is automatic. That would be a ministerial function, much as the setting of the mill levy to pay the bonds, any bonds at a local level is a ministerial function. And then we deal compliance with the debt limitation of Article 16, Section 5, which is the 10% of assessed valuation limit, determined using only the school district share of the payment for that debt. That will take care of that problem, unless somebody does something just absolutely wild. You're not going to hit that limit. But if you don't have that provision in there, then you'd be back to the problem of limiting the non-mineral counties in particular in a way that might cause trouble. Then, Madam Chairman, legislature provides a system determining which capital facilities are not needed for education, therefore not subject to equalization. And that's something I expect there'll be some exploration statutory of what's appropriate and what isn't. And there are facilities that are used for both. My county, Madam Chairman, in the 1920s, did a bond issue and created the auditorium at Toronto County High School that has been widely used from that date through to the present for community things as well as for school district purposes. And swimming pools are another example of that kind of thing. And this provision would allow, say, okay, we'll pay for a quarter of the cost or half the cost, but the rest is community luxury. You've got to pay for it. It's a community. You need that provision. And then, Madam Chairman, legislature may appropriate funds to alleviate a hardship. You got a fire, you got a bad earthquake in the western part of the state, which is a distinct possibility, Madam Chairman. There's a tornado, such as came through Wright a few years ago. You could have a hardship, and that gives us the flexibility of it. Madam Chairman, that's the substance of the amendment. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Senator Scott? Senator Rothfuss?
Thanks, Madam Chairman. On the equalization, so page 2, the Romanet 3, the equalization concept looks at the state average per person assessed valuation. And my question is, does that truly end up equalizing from a skin in the game standpoint? Because if you are below that number, it is equalized, right? Everybody below that number is going to
Every
feel
assessed valuation is lower, that's right.
is going to feel the same skin in the game effect on that assessed valuation. Everybody above it, though, is going to have a declining curve, where if you're near the top, if you're Teton County, and we saw that in our property tax discussion, where Teton County is like at 6 mils, where everybody else is at 12. So you have a circumstance where in 4-ish to 5 counties of the state, you pay, as an individual, as a property owner, a much smaller portion of the bill, and you easily pay it off. So that's been one of my concerns. I think this is largely unchanged since the last few times that we've talked about it, and that's always been one of my concerns. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Madam Chairman.
Senator?
That's excellent point, and I should have covered that in my presentation. The counties with the wealth will pay less. 2 reasons for that. First, Madam Chairman, I couldn't figure out a decent way to equalize that without an incredibly complex, cumbersome system. And frankly, I don't think you could ever get a perfect system on that score. Second, those counties that are generating that wealth, they are more expensive to operate in. For those reasons, we have equalized thoroughly on the operating side with the recapture provisions, and that works. We equalize some other things too, but they do need, this does cut the wealthier counties some extra slack. Madam Chairman, I think when you look at the broad scope of things that we do and don't do, it's probably fair. And it's a practical way to do it.
Senator, go ahead, follow up.
And again, when we've talked about this before, I've always wondered why we don't set up a system that is similar to the rebate and recapture, where you effectively do have uniform taxation but then have a system to ensure distribution so that pursuant to the Campbell decisions, school financing is not a function of local resources and wealth, it's a function of state local resources and wealth, which you could do, but again, it's always been my objection to this approach, is that, I'd want to move to one of the wealthy places because the schools would get built for much less of my money. It would be oil and gas paying for it. And it's always better to be near an oil and gas field if you don't have a rebate recapture system, if you've got local wealth doing it. So I was hoping this draft would have some different algorithms in it, but it seems to be that same algorithm that rewards the rich and makes life more difficult for the poor.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Senator Scott?
Madam Chairman, I couldn't figure a way that I administratively, without total explosion in complexity, that could be done on just capital construction. And yes, the wealthier districts will pay more than their share of the equalization, but it'll be the wealthy homeowner, the very wealthy homeowners, or in other areas, the oil and gas operators or coal fields that will be paying that extra. I think in balance, the system works fairly enough because we do have the recapture that doesn't give the wealthy counties any slack for the extra expenses that creating the wealth costs.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, with that, let's go ahead and open it up for public testimony. Anyone that would like to come up and testify on Senate Joint Resolution 6, please come forward. Welcome back.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, Tate Mullen, Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. So the bill seems to have the potential to be an additional invitation to litigation, as it clearly violates equity provisions in education. Reverting the responsibility to construct school facilities to local districts while a number of significant property tax relief bills are in the works is setting our locals, our students, and our public schools up for failure. Speaking of litigation, during the trial, the director of the Facilities Commission testified that without an increase in major maintenance money, there would be a $2 billion problem in facilities. This amendment will move that $2 billion problem to local school districts. Local property tax is going to have to pay for either greatly increased maintenance money or take the $2 billion hit. Even where there are new schools built over time, they are subject to becoming deficient, even if maintained. Sooner or later, every local district is going to have to raise money for repair and replacement of facilities. The bottom line of this bill is that it is a shift of a huge problem from the state to local taxpayers. The bill will guarantee a tax increase on local property. The only viable means of issuing bonds is to back them with the revenue from local tax mills levied by school districts. When the court said that the state was responsible, school districts stopped levying mills in general for bonds for schools. A few levied a mill for enhancements that the state wouldn't pay for, but those were very few. The bill also authorizes a new mill statewide to raise the money to pay for equalization of mills. No one should miss the point that when you vote yes on this bill, you are voting for a major tax increase. One increase on everyone and others that will be levied by local districts. The bill has the problem that if you equalize mills, it does not have any correlation to the money needed in any school district. Some may have a lot of need because the state did not fund their deficient schools yet. Gillette is coming to mind. And some others have brand new schools. Small districts like Goshen and Niobrara will get a small amount because the equalization is per pupil and they have few pupils. It's more expensive to build per pupil and maintain schools for a smaller population. Thus, they actually need more per pupil than some others because the per pupil cost is higher. We've tried this before. It doesn't work. One last thought. This is going to return us to the days when we had to cut programs or other costs and deny salary raises to have money to pay for the new roof or boiler or even just regular maintenance. This is going to impact kids and we'll end up with deficient buildings, unsuitable for modern education, and reductions in core funding for operations, or both. I urge a no vote on this bill. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Mullen? Yes, go ahead, Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, did whoever wrote that actually read the bill? It's been around since 2018, hasn't changed that much. Doesn't deal with major maintenance, leaves that alone. Doesn't do per pupil, it does it per person.
Senator
Mr.
Schuler, Chairman Schuler, Senator Scott, yes, we have read the bill and we read the previous iterations of the bill. What we are saying is that there is a deficiency in major maintenance. I know the bill doesn't address the major maintenance issue, but we're already looking at a significant major maintenance issue that this will compound. The per pupil piece, we talked about the individual, you're still talking about a population size, whether you want to call it a pure per pupil or per person. It is going to impact smaller districts and those wealthier districts significantly more, as those costs and those needs aren't reflected.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Anyone else who would like to testify? We're just about out of time, so keep it pretty quick, if you could.
Madam Chair,
Thank you so much.
Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Madam Chair, I guess when we look at this bill, we have to go back to why did the court imply the obligation on the state in the first place? So when you go back and you look at that Campbell decision, the court talked about the necessity of the uniform and equitable education provided to all Wyoming school children. That's because of the constitutional right guaranteed to every child by the Constitution. So the court said that the kid in Sundance and the kid in Laramie ought to get the same education, and they said that facilities should be part of that. The handout provided, I think, tells a story of a good effort by the state to get to that, to get there. But Madam Chair, we have not leveled the playing field yet. We're at a place today where some districts have got theirs. Natrona County's done pretty well. Other districts have not. Other districts are awaiting theirs. And so the state has not taken it to a place where we have that equitable facility across the state. We're still working on that. As a matter of fact, Madam Chairman, the very issue of the adequacy of the state's funding of school capital construction is currently before the courts. The Wyoming court will soon weigh in on the question of whether or not the state is meeting its obligation under our current system. Has the state done its job? So over this time, from Campbell to today, there are people in some counties who have been paying their resource to the state for this statewide system, and they have not gotten theirs yet. They've paid for somebody else's, and they're patiently waiting their turn. They're waiting for theirs. And so their dollars have gone to somebody else while they await theirs. So, Madam Chairman, do you have concerns over the fundamental fairness, the fundamental question of whether the state has leveled the playing field such that each community going forward has the same opportunities to provide the educational facilities? Or are we in a place where the state has failed its obligation, so much so in some communities that they are now starting with 1 foot in the hole? They have ground to make up because the state has not met its obligation. So, Madam Chair, I do have concerns with that. I'm going to skip the majority of the rest of my concerns due to concern for your time. And I will point, Section 2 of this talks about what is it that the voter gets. What are we going to tell the voter about this bill so that they can be informed? And Madam Chair, on page 4, line 5 through 8, talks about how we used to fund it. but it only tells part of the story. It doesn't tell the whole story of how we used to fund it. Does the voter need more context, or is that even relevant? It also doesn't tell the voter, hey, if we do this system, there is a continued obligation to the state that could lead to more taxes. Does Section 2 adequately inform the voter of the potential impact to them of the statewide assessed mill levy? I don't think it does. So, Madam Chair, I think if we're going to put it before the voter, I think Section 2 needs some work to be honest to the voter about the implications. On page 2, line 18, it says that the cost of paying bonds and interest shall be equalized. Then on page 3 at line 4, it says how that equalization might happen, but it doesn't change the fact that it shall be equalized. So there is a continuing state obligation. And so I look at this, and part of me sort of sees it like a family. The kids are the school is the child. Has the state paid its obligation? Has the state paid its child support? Are we current on child support before we renegotiate the plan going forward? Or is there still a need for the state to meet its obligation before we have that new plan, that new path moving forward? I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I know Senator DeCaria wanted to talk about a little bit of the past in all of this, and I'm just going to stop for sake of time.
Mr. DeCaria, will you be around on Monday? Is there any chance we could
Madam
just hold
Chairman?
your testimony then? It's 10 o'clock right now.
Madam Chairman,
If
I
you're going to
will-
be around, if not, we could,
I'll be around.
we would love to do that. It sounds like we're going to need a little more testimony on this bill, so we won't take any action, and we'd love to hear from Mr. DeCaria if you're going to be around Monday. And we'll have maybe some other questions to ask. So thanks so much, and we'll look forward to continuing on with this bill on